Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to Black Women Voices OKC Let's Talk About Politics panel. My name is Sache Primeaux Shaw, and I will be your moderator for tonight's discussion. Black Women Voices is an Oklahoma City based monthly virtual series that creates safe space for Black women to share their lived experiences, to educate, and lead the community into action or self reflection. Black Women Voices elevates the often silenced truths of Black local women by giving them a platform to feel empowered, supported, and heard. Black Women Voices seeks to bring structural and systemic racism to the light in order to create a more equal and just system of accountability for all. This is the fifth monthly panel of the season that we've held from June 2020 to December 2020 on a range of topics with Black women centered as the experts. Tonight's panel focuses on Black women's lived experiences as elected officials and leaders in politics, as well as the impact that structural and systemic racism has on their ability to serve. We want to emphasize that the views and opinions expressed on this panel do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Black Women Voices Project nor its sponsors. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsors of this season of Black Women's Voices: Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, Heartland, True Sky Credit Union, Whirl, Bumbershoot PR, Metro Family Magazine, The Gooding Group, Invest. Please be aware that disrespectful and inappropriate commentary will not be tolerated. Any disparaging comments will be screenshot and deleted from this platform. This work could not happen without your support. If you're interested in sponsoring or giving a tax-deductible contribution to Black Women Voices, please go to okwc.org/donate and write Black Women Voices in the additional comments section. All right, let's get to it. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrea Benjamin, who will kick off tonight's conversation. Dr. Benjamin, you are the Associate Professor at the Clara Luper Department of African and African American Studies for the University of Oklahoma. We're grateful to have you start us off with the context setting on what the data tells us about race and politics. Women in general lack representation in elected office, but the disparity is even greater for Black women and other women of color in positions of influence. Many of the voices you will hear from tonight are tonight's first, in many ways, in this 2020. Can you talk on what you've seen in the research about the intersections of race and politics and the value diverse representation brings to governance? Dr. Benjamin.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to serve on a panel with such amazing women that have done so many amazing things, and I'm excited to hear from each of our later guests. So one thing I want to start on an optimistic note, which is when Black women run, Black women are typically overwhelmingly supported by other Black women, right? So community ends up really coming into play. And that's true for other women of color as well, according to the research. But there are challenges to running for office as a woman of color, particularly as they face that intersection of sort of what gender stereotypes are applied to their candidacy, and then what racial stereotypes or ethnic stereotypes might also be applied to their candidacy as they run. Typically, though, what we find is once they do the job, it is true that voters understand that they can do the job, right? So it's really sort of during this election period that we might sort of see the most hurdles that the candidate has to face, but typically with incumbency, although we'll get to that a little bit later, we can sort of overcome some of those challenges. One thing is that we're learning through the research is that some of the stereotypes that we've typically applied racially, the racial stereotypes applied to candidates, we're finding that some of those are also gendered, but against men, right? So that maybe there might be some small advantages that women of color, Black women in particular, can sort of use. They might be able to overcome them a little bit easier than some of their male counterparts. So that's one thing to think about. And if that's the case, right, then we might think about those situations where a woman of color actually can be more electable than a man of color running, again, depending on the context of the election. One thing that we do want to keep in mind, though, is one of the challenges, especially of being the first, is that sometimes the way we talk about that, it can mobilize the in-group community, but we also want to be cautious because it can also mobilize a counter group that doesn't want to see this person be elected for the first time. So I typically study local politics. And so as per my usual, I'm going to talk a little bit about that to get us started, which is that currently, when we look at the largest 100 cities across the country, we currently have a lot of women, Black women serving in the mayor's office. So we have Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C., London Breed in San Francisco, who we went to the same college, so go Aggies, Vi Lyles in Charlotte, Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, LaToya Cantrell in New Orleans, and Sharon Weston Broom in Baton Rouge. Right, so we're sort of living through this really historical moment. And I think one thing that we've seen from the coverage of the summer is that these Black women are leading their cities really well. When it comes to sort of thinking about COVID precautions, we can cite them as trying to take some of the most precautions that were set out to protect the residents of their city, right? And so we sort of think of that as a win, maybe. When we take a bigger view, the Center for American Women in Politics, housed at Rutgers, really sort of holds the best archive or sort of data set when it comes to women running for office and winning, right? So holding office. And in our in the 116th Congress, there are currently 127 women serving, and of those, 47 are women of color, right? So we know that we're sort of getting our numbers up. However, though, when we think about the Congress on a whole, right, women of color represent less than 9% of the entire Congress. So we're just not there in terms of that representation. When we look statewide, we also see, some gains. So there are currently 90 women serving in statewide elective executive offices, and 17.8% of those are women of color, right? But again, when we think about the bigger picture, the entire statewide executive level, only 4.5% of those elected officials are women of color. State legislatures, which we'll hear from today, often have some of the most diversity, right? So we'll hear from some of our state legislators today. And among those, then women of color are 25% of those elected officials, right? So we get some traction. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, there are definitely different ways to think about it. And again, I think 2018, so 2 years ago, we definitely saw this banner moment of, women running and women being elected. And it was such a great thing, right? And we might think, well, why does that matter? Well, the research says that when women of color serve in our elected bodies, they're more likely to put legislation forward that benefits those communities. And, of course, it's politics, so some people win and some people lose. But, you know,
Oh, Dr. Benjamin froze. Some technical difficulties. Hold on one second. Okay, everyone. We lost Dr. Benjamin for a little bit, but we're going to continue. Let's see. Just one second. Okay. We're going to go ahead and go to Chairwoman Alicia Andrews. Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone else because that was the next piece. Okay, so we want to welcome Chairwoman Alicia Andrews, Representative Merleyn Bell, Representative Ajay Pittman, Councilwoman Christine Allen and Mauree Turner for joining us and sharing your lived experiences and expertise with us. We'll start with Chairwoman Alicia Andrews. As the first Black chair of a major party in Oklahoma, what has been your experience and what are some of the obstacles you faced in this position?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. I'm so honored to be included in this group, and snaps up to Sache for being our moderator. I'm grateful for that. So, as the first Black chair of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and I'm the first Black chair, not the first Black woman chair. I'm actually the first Black chair. I've had a wide variety of experiences. So, the positives, the fact that I'm the first Black chair gave me the opportunity to get a lot of press up front. And what that did was it elevated the platform of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, which had been silent for quite a little bit. And so it gave me an opportunity to espouse Democratic values in a way that hadn't been being talked about in Oklahoma in quite some time. And so I got that. Secondly, it's really important. And as Dr. Benjamin said, when Black women run, they're more apt to put forth policies and issues and practices that affect more of the electorate. And though I'm not a legislative person, representation matters, even with the organizing community and the volunteer community and in recruiting candidates and supporting candidates. And so I have had the opportunity pre-COVID to go around and meet with different constituency groups all over the state. And when I encounter a majority African-American gathering, it gives me life because I feel like they ask questions that maybe prior to me being chair, they were uncomfortable with asking, and that gives them more of an avenue to be involved and to volunteer, and they want to be more involved because they feel like their voices may be heard. That's not to say that before me, their voices were deliberately left out, but because I am viewed as one of the other, then I am easier to approach maybe than prior chairs. So one of the things that I think about when I talk with non-white constituents is we've long needed someone in leadership, excuse me, who would address systemic racism head on, who will acknowledge that it exists and who will let the activist community and the young community know that we're not ignoring it and that we're going to deal with it. And I have been received overwhelmingly well with that. Now, some of the challenges is the Oklahoma GOP has used my race as a dog whistle. They've used my race to get publicity for themselves. I have taken that and used it as an opportunity to elevate the Democratic platform. But if I were one of my white counterparts, my race would not be coming up. And so that's a real challenge. And it's a little bit more of the nastiness that's entered into our politics of late, starting from the top. And it has reached Oklahoma, but I use it to flip it and elevate the Democratic platform. And another challenge is that some folks have taken a wait and see point of view. I didn't get the benefit of the doubt that some of my prior counterparts have gotten, but I am getting the support. It has come around. So I've had a varied experience, but most of it positive.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chair Andrews. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pivot to Representative Pittman. Can you talk about being a young Black and Indigenous elected woman leader and what it's like serving in the legislature?
Thank you. Thank you for including that, Sache, my fellow Indigenous sister. Hello, everyone. Like they said, I am State Representative Ajay Pittman. I represent House District 99 for my Indigenous people. My native name is Havisi Mujesi, and I am from the Seminole tribe and Bird Clan. She posed the question of what it's like to be a young Black woman. I just want to give you a little bit of demographics first. I serve in the Oklahoma legislature. I am the only young woman of color. I am the first young millennial to ever be elected to a seat in the African American community. And I am the first daughter to have ever served in her mom's seat in the state of Oklahoma. So there are a lot of firsts in that just first couple of sentences in my race that made it very historic. But in the Oklahoma legislature in 2019, women were 50% of the state's population, but only 22% of the legislature. This is an increase of 14% of what it had been in the past. However, women in Oklahoma hold 23 seats out of 101 elected men in the House and 149 overall elected officials. 5 women are women of color, and only 3 are women that are Black. So that kind of gives you the landscape of what my daily world looks like when I walk into the House floor. There's only 3 women that I see that look like me, and I'm the only one that's young. So there is no one else on the floor to ask for advice. There is no one else in my community to ask for advice, even though I've had wonderful mentors and wonderful women that have come before me to serve. There has never been anyone serving at this age at this time. So that brings a level of difficulty. We get it from our leadership. Last legislative session, I had one of my white male counterparts quote Martin Luther King to me on the House floor against one of my bills. He thought that it was appropriate to use one of our community's heroes and a nation's heroes against me as I was trying to lobby for my community. And so those are some of the things we deal with as we try to go in and fight for our community each and every day, just on the Black front. However, being young adds an extra layer to it because a lot of people are doing this as their second career, not their first. And so when you are trying to bring up ideas that are young and innovative and that are going to look to the future for not just millennials, but Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, sometimes they don't understand that lingo. They don't understand that conversation. They're not open to having it. And so you have to make those strides and explain it to them, because we have to be looking farther in the future if we're going to retain talent in the state of Oklahoma. But I challenge you to think of something else. Our community is one of tradition. And because as a young person, I broke that tradition, has been a little bit different. We often say that Black women are the most unprotected. However, sometimes, and it has been my experience, that I am also unprotected by African-American women in my community that have been in my position before or that have served in a leadership capacity and things like that. Our community likes to have ownership of you, of your time, or I've watched you grow up. So that means they get to behave in a way that is not respectful to you or your title. And so we have to watch ourselves, because as much as I love being a Black woman and I love being on this panel, there's sometimes I don't feel supported by other Black women. I feel attacked by other Black women. Or I was on the news one time and someone wanted to comment on my eyebrows instead of commenting on the legislation that I was talking about. And sometimes we have to make sure that we are making those strides so that we don't deter our young from running, so that we don't eat our young alive. I am sitting up here trying to pave the way for so many outside of me that are coming behind me. And when I look to those that are here to help me, it is oftentimes that those that come from my community turn their back on me because they feel like I should have waited my turn, because they were not ready to pass the torch. And because I am the first, their ideas of what my voice stands for is It's something that takes time to grow. It's something that they have to evolve to, and they have to understand that we as young people and as young women are now having seats at the table. But we see disparities of this not on a local level, but on a national level. We are attacked and targeted for our looks, for our expressions, for how we change our hair, or for how we wear our clothes, or for our body types. Or for how our facial expressions are. We even see this on a national level with Vice President candidate Kamala Harris and all of the remarks that have been made post the debate that they recently had. So we have to make sure that as Black women, we are supporting each other, we are protecting each other, but that our communities are wrapping around us. We don't always have to all get along and all agree, but we should not attack each other, and we should not attack our young as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Representative Pittman. We have Dr. Benjamin back. Let's see. Did you want to finish your presentation, or?
We can move forward. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. So we'll go to candidate Mauree Turner for House District 88. You are the first Muslim candidate to win a party nomination here in the state of Oklahoma, and the first Black person who identifies as LGBTQ plus running for the legislature. Can you talk about your experience campaigning and some of the challenges you've faced, and what do those intersections mean to you and the future of the state?
For sure. Thank you so much for that question. And also just kind of want to reiterate, like Chairperson Andrew said, like, thank you for allowing me to be here and share this space with you. So as a non-binary femme, to be able to share this space with you all is really kind of remarkable. And from what I understand, probably the first non-binary femme to be able to share this space with you all. I think there are a lot of things. I mean, I think that's the point of intersections, right? Running in this race in Oklahoma and being Black comes with its own set of hurdles. And I think in that respect, we've all experienced, everyone who's had to run for a race has experienced some of the same, right? And even things that we have to fight in our workplaces too. The extra lens that I get, right, is anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, anti-LGBTQ2S plus rhetoric, and sprinkled with a little Islamophobia on top of there too. And when I think about that, and I think about this panel of remarkable people that I'm able to sit with right now, the number one question that I think I get whenever a new article drops or something like that, is why does their religion matter? Why does their gender matter? All of these types of things, right? And I think this panel really speaks volumes to why those things are important, right? When we think about the stats that have been thrown out, Dr. Benjamin's wonderful presentation, is the fact that visibility very much so is key, right? For a lot of different reasons, to help us continue to throw the door open so people can see themselves in the places that make, interpret, and enforce policy that dictates our everyday lives, right? But also because when we continuously have folks that have our shared lived experiences making those policies, it makes it a lot harder to continuously carve people out, right? Community organizers, community activists have continuously filled the gaps that our government, right, leaves for us, whether that's federal, whether that's local. And when we leave out the voices of those directly impacted by the systems that we probably will make a piece of legislation on that we don't have to touch, right, that our legislature is not currently have to deal with, then we carve out some of our most valuable voices. The folks closest to the problems are closest to the solutions, right? And I think that that's like really, really powerful. And I think back on when Dr. Benjamin touched on this idea of electability politics. And I think Representative Pittman touched on it too a bit, right? Is that we take a step up, right? We decide to believe in ourselves as much as our community believes in us. But one of the biggest things that we kind of come up against is that sometimes people say, oh, well, I really like this candidate, but I just don't think that they'll win, right? And so people shy away from doing that work. I think in the beginning, I'm very type A, and I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can. And I want to make sure that I am, that I've crossed my T's and I've dotted my I's. So I sat down and had meeting after meeting after meeting with people when I was trying to decide whether or not I wanted to run. And I remember calling people. And some of the things that I heard, whether it was like on the phone or in person, was, maybe you just shouldn't run, right? Wait until they term out. But the point of running, right, and the point of having that representation is because we need people who see us, right? We need those innovative ideas, as Representative Pittman was saying, right? We need to be able to continuously grow. And when you have folks who don't look like the shift that your district is making, right, who don't represent you, then that is how we find people to run. And then how we elect them is by putting the work in. Even if you feel like other people aren't going to show up for a candidate that you love, that is when you show up even harder. That's not when you shy away, right? I wholeheartedly believe it and I mean it when I say that relational organizing has literally saved my life several times. I was talking about how for some people in my life, I came out to as queer before I came out to them as Muslim, because being Muslim is one thing, right? Being Muslim in Oklahoma is another thing, in my opinion, right? And so you have to relational organizing for me in that sense meant that I had to really show someone my heart before I really let them into who I was. And I think about that and what I do. And I think about how relational organizing has really helped push us forward. And I mean, progressives in politics and what that really looks like. Because in our primary, we did relational organizing and we identified 250 new people. And we also won by 250 votes. Relational organizing works, right? Listening to communities works, and that is proven science. And so what I think about the hurdles that we had to overcome and what that looks like inside and outside of community, it's nothing compared to what we've done and what we'll continue to do. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer, Mauree. All right, we're going to move on to Representative Bell. Okay. Representative Bell, you are the first African-American woman elected outside of a minority majority district to the legislature. What are some issues unique to the Black community in Norman, which is a former sundown town? And how do you navigate those as the first Black rep elected to represent the town?
Thank you, Stacia. I'm so excited to be here with everybody else and to answer this question in particular. So I want to start off by just contextualizing the district that I represent, which is House District 45. That's in East Norman. And as you noted, which I'm really happy that you noted, Norman has a history as a sundown town, meaning that Black people were not only very unwelcome, but in a very dangerous predicament if they found themselves in Norman after dark, literally. It wasn't until the 60s that the first Black family moved here to Norman. Dr. Henderson, George Henderson, which I know all of you know, and his family, moving from Michigan here to OU so that Dr. Henderson could teach at the University of Oklahoma. So Norman has quite a different history than Oklahoma City, than Tulsa, than where my counterparts in the Legislative Black Caucus come from, including Representative Pittman. Our population of Black people in Norman is round about 4%. And I myself am also in a unique position, being the first Black or African American woman, and like Chair Andrew said, the first African American person that's also true for my district and for my win in 2018. But I'm also a Black biracial woman. I have a white mother and had a Black father who passed away in 2008. So the majority of my life, having grown up here in Norman, was a very white mirrored life, is the way that I like to put it. And I often talk about the way that I am considered the most comfortable other to people, because unlike some of my counterparts here, I don't necessarily read on first glance as a Black woman. So it's always important to me, once that conversation opens up with somebody, once they realize what my background really is, which 9 times out of 10 is a very welcome discussion and a very open discussion with that person. There've only been a few times in my life where people actively bristled and became very uncomfortable. Most of the time there's a little bit of, brain work happening there for a person, like, oh, okay, well, I thought you were Samoan, or I thought you were Italian. Let me just readjust my thinking to this. And now let me figure out how I'm going to relate to you. Being in that position and being able to have those conversations with people, especially now that I'm doing it with constituents here in Norman, is always something that I view as an opportunity. I like to think of my position, not just in the legislature, but the position that I've always had just as a person growing up in this community, as a bridge. So in a way that some other people may not be able to have conversations because of the intense buildup that somebody might have in reaction to another person based on what they think they know about them. That bridge building so often happens in a way that allows me to diffuse racial tension between people, between our different communities here in Norman. Being at the University of Oklahoma is housed here, we do have a lot of diversity in a way, because we have people coming from different countries, different states, different backgrounds, who are all culminating here. So being able to build that bridge with them and show them, you might have an impression of what Black women are like, what Black people are like, what biracial people are like, but you knew me first before you realized that that's who you were talking to. And that's often a way to build this really wonderful bridge. So I've continued that in the legislature, building those opportunities, or taking those opportunities to build those bridges. And in doing so, it's been, a wonderful experience, and really quite a privilege to sit at tables where I know other people are looking at me as a voice to represent, maybe even looking to represent Black people as a whole. But because I'm not from a majority minority district, as we'd say, I'm not necessarily representing everyone back home. The majority of the people that I represent are white. So I'm always keeping that in mind as well, but trying to use that seat at the table to remind people that even though our population is 4%, improving, empowering, and bettering the lives of Black people and brown people across our state really lifts all of us. And it's so important to me to be able to tell that story and to use the sort of skin privilege, I guess you'd say, to elevate those discussions and to diffuse that tension when I do it. That's always what I have in mind when I'm sitting at those tables. And that's something that I'm hoping post November 3rd that I continue to get to do.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Representative Bell. Okay, so I had a question for you and Representative Pittman both. What are some pressing issues in legislation that you both plan to unveil for next session as it relates to the community?
Will you repeat that question,
Okay.
please?
What are some pressing issues and legislation that you both plan to unveil for the next session as it relates to your communities?
Okay, I am so sorry, but it is glitching on my end. So
It's fine.
one more
Okay,
time.
So, what are some pressing issues and legislation that you both plan to unveil for the next session as it relates to the community?
Hold on. Will you type it to me in the chat? Because I can't get it. It's like bleep org fragments.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no problem.
So, Sacha, while you're doing that, because I'm not glitchy at the moment, maybe I can fill in the gap.
Yeah, there you go.
So, one of the things that I started working on as a result of joining the Black Caucus in the legislature, which really was not, to be completely honest, on my radar, is sickle cell disease. So we had a presentation by community members for, the foundation that's run out of Tulsa by Velvet Brown Watts, who does a wonderful job of advocating for sickle cell families, or patients and their families. And, again, because Norman is 4%, or the Black population in Norman is 4%, this is not necessarily affecting a large swath of my constituency, but nevertheless, I felt like it was really important. And one of the reasons why I felt that I could really be helpful in that is because Norman is a community full of people who are very committed to nonprofit work and are committed to community building in that way. So I have previously served on United Way boards. I serve on the board of the Thunderbird Clubhouse, which is a mental health nonprofit. And, there are tons and tons of nonprofit advocates in Norman. So it was always my hope and intention that I'd be able to create legislation and help that population by connecting them with resources here in Norman. And, we have a long way to go because, again, it is a disease that is not very well known to people in populations that are not affected by it because it is a genetic disease and a blood disease that's not typical in Caucasian communities. But it's still really important to me, and it's been really wonderful to work with them. So I'm hoping to continue pushing forward legislation that will help to create funding in our actual state budget for research, because the research and the work that's being done to propel forward a cure is very compelling at the moment. There have been a lot of changes really, really recently that I'd like to see the state take a top 10 leadership role in helping to eradicate. So that's one thing that I can think of right off the bat that I'm really excited about.
Okay, now I'm ready. I know what the question is. No, that was great. Thank you, Representative Bell, and thank you, Sacha, for bearing with me. Some of the legislation that is truly, truly important to me, near and dear to my heart. My background is in healthcare. And so one of the pieces of legislation that I ran last year that our COVID session didn't allow us to get through or hear was maternal health and infant mortality rates. That is something that is important to me. It's important to my community because Black women and Black children or Black babies are dying 3 times the rate at their counterparts. And so it is something that I am working on. It is legislation that I plan to reintroduce this upcoming legislative session so that we are saving our moms and our babies in our community. You can be pro-choice and allow a woman to choose what she does with her body. However, you can be pro-life so that when she chooses to give life and that life is here, we make sure that we do everything that we can to make sure that they are getting the best care, the best life, that there are no implicit biases that are going into their care, and that they are able to live full and healthy lives as Oklahomans and thrive here. Another topic that is really big in our community and that has been is food deserts. We know that we are getting a grocery store. We know that Homeland is coming, and we know that there is the Restore OKC market that is now on 23rd Street in House District 99 as well. Last year, I introduced a bill that would seek to allow EBT benefits to be used in online platforms. And because COVID did not allow that to make it through the process, I was able to work with DHS and the USDA to go ahead and get that enacted into a policy. So we didn't need law to change that. So now it is going into effect that the USDA is going to allow Oklahoma to be a state that allows EBT benefits to use in online platforms, so that our community and different communities have access to HelloFresh online, Walmart Instacart. COVID-19 now more than ever says that we need to make sure everyone has access to all the avenues to use online, whether it's grocery shopping, whether it's education, anything like that. We need to make sure that we are expanding more access to online services. We tend to talk about criminal justice reform in terms of police brutality, and that is something that is very big. However, something that I am planning to study in my upcoming interim study on October 27th is criminal justice reform as it pertains to reentry. We are talking about people as they encounter the criminal justice system and they're going in, but what are we talking about as they come out? And how are we helping them create a life for themselves as they come out? So are we automatically giving them licensing? How many state departments do they have to go to get an ID or get a birth certificate? Those types of things. Those are my questions. We also had one of our biggest commutations last year as it relates to state question 781. That was a retroactive state question 780 and 781. But how many of those people were people of color? How many of those people came from our community? And so those are the demographics that we want to look at. And my goal is to introduce a piece of legislation that would mirror Georgia's piece of legislation that would add a community supervision department to our government. That way it is a one-stop shop, and it's not called parole. It is called community supervision, because we are all community and we all want to make sure these people succeed, and we counteract our recidivism rates as we want to keep them out of the system and keep them from going back into the system. So can we make one agency that partners with community allies, that partners with community leaders, as well as state leaders and state agencies, that make sure when these people come out of our detention centers, they are able and on a path to live the best life possible?
Thank you so much, Representative Pittman. All right. Final question for all panelists. What is the best piece of advice you were given that has helped you in your roles? And what advice would you give to Black women wanting to run for office? What can the public do to better support Black women in positions of influence? Everyone don't have to go at once.
Was that for me?
Yeah, it's for
Because it's
everyone.
still glitchy. Sorry.
It's for everyone. But if, I guess Dr. Benjamin can go first since she's back on.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank everyone for their patience and their grace during my technological difficulties. I think the best piece of advice that I was given is to be myself. And I think that that took a long time to sort of accept that advice. But since I've been applying that advice to my day-to-day life has gotten a lot better. So I think that would be one thing. As we, as all the panelists have touched on, when women run and when women win, they serve their communities. And I think that your community supports you and gets you there. So you owe it to them to kind of be yourself and do that work. I think what can the public do? I think that we can really push back on the stereotypes that are applied to us as we run for office. I think Representative Pittman talked about that, Representative Bami, candidate Turner, everybody. But when we see it, I think it's our duty to say, hey, that sounds like you're engaging in stereotypes. Let's talk about the candidates' abilities. Let's talk about their record. And I think when we sort of confront it head on, it takes the power away from those stereotypes. And so people can't say things like, well, I didn't like the way she was talking, right? We kind of deflate those things. So that would be my advice to the public.
So the best advice that I received upon becoming chair was to find my people, lean on my people, ask for help. And that was a little bit difficult for me, the asking for help part. But I have since learned that asking for help is the only way to survive. And you do have to find your people. You can't ask for help from everybody, but you do need to find your people. You do need to let them help you. You'd be amazed when you go out looking for them, where you will find them, and how helpful they can truly be. And how the public can help in that regard is be someone's people. It's truly that simple. Stand up for those who are asking for help. We are all in the arena where we're organizing and, asking for help and need help. And so if you're out there, just saying, what can I do to help? That's helpful, but offer your skill, whatever your skill is. I'm good with Excel. I'm good with writing scripts. I'm good. I had someone when I was running saying, yeah, there's not a whole lot I can do for you, but I'll drive you around. Oh my gosh, that was incredibly helpful. Driving all over the state, having someone drive me around. So, how the public can help is offer your skills and just be there, be an ear, be of support.
Yes, you definitely need people. My advice was a quote given to me by someone very special, near and dear to my heart. It says, live and let live, use your gifts to change the world. And that says you need to live yourself. Sometimes you're going to have to let some stuff live and let it roll off your back, but every day strive to use your gifts to change the world. And everyone doesn't have to be in an elected position or in policy to use their gifts to change the world. Whatever your gift is, if that's activism, if that's social media, if that's phone banking, if that's donations, if that's making somebody a pizza, if that's cooking food, if that's taking care of children, if that's education, use whatever gift you have to change the world, because everything that someone does, we all have a place, we all have a journey, we all have a purpose. And whatever your purpose is changing the world in someone's life, whether you feel it on a daily basis or not, whether they tell you or not. The little things that you do each day changes someone's life. I think what I would say to the public is give us grace. Give us grace to be human. Give us grace to have sick days. Give us grace to go on vacation. Give us grace to get it wrong. Also, allow yourself the opportunity to get to know us. Politics is a contact sport. We don't know all the events all the time. We don't know all 40,000 of our constituents all the time. So give us the opportunity to come get to know us and know that we are humans, know that we are real people. We have mental health days. I would also say to the women on this panel, self-care is so important. We are living in a world 2020 has been so heavy, and sometimes we carry so much weight on us as Black women, some of us as young Black women, that we are trying to save our communities. We are trying to save our families. We are showing up for so many people. We cannot forget to show up for ourselves, and we cannot forget on this journey to live our truth and live our lives as well. So if that means going on vacation, if that means doing a cooking class, if that means reading a book, whatever that looks like for you, don't forget to live through your service. Don't forget to make your own memories through your service.
I think just kind of going off of all of those is that those are all pieces of advice that I was given and things that I try to continuously implement throughout my life, and throughout this campaign specifically, right? So going into this, I sat down and I made a round of calls. Like I said, I reached out to people in the community. I like to cross my T's and dot my I's. I think one of the most humbling experiences that I had on this campaign was the fact that there were people who said that they would show up that didn't show up, right? And there were people that I didn't expect to show up that showed up. I'm really excited and grateful for my race because while it opened a door into my life that I wasn't ready for, it opened so much more for folks to come in, right? Continuously. So we had volunteers from across the nation. And I also, in a weird kind of way, thank COVID for that, right? In this digital space, right? And so making sure that I don't hold a grudge or anything, right? Things come up in people's lives, right? So live and let live, right? And then also, one of the best pieces of advice that I could give to somebody who is running for office is that it is so, so, so important to be able to trust the community, right? Career politics that's not my thing. It's not my zhuzh. But one thing I do understand, or one thing that I always kind of held true, was that if I ran for office, I would only run when my community was asking me to. And I think people know the stat. Some people know the stat that I think a woman has to be asked at least 7 times to run for office, right? And I think once you add being Black on top of that, being a religion that's other than Christian on top of that, being gender diverse on top of that, those numbers go up and up and up. And I had questions. I think I had those conversations anywhere from 20 to 25 times on whether or not I would run for office. And I decided that I would go ahead and I would trust my community, right? Because what they were asking me to do was jump and that they would catch me. And I had to have faith in my community that they would catch me when I jumped, right? And I think it's having faith in the community that you want to represent, right? Having faith in them to choose a leader that's best for them. And I think that, sorry to all of the representatives, but I think that there's really no place better than House District 88 to be, right? In this time in the nation. And I think any kind of representative thinks that of their community. And hopefully I will be the future representative of House District 88. But I think it's when it comes to something like that, when it comes to your community asking you to run, you have to respect them enough to say, community organizers, right? Community members know what they need, right? And so I think that's absolutely wonderful. And that's my biggest piece of advice, is the fact that you have to be able to trust your community as much as they trust you.
I am very inclined to battle Mauree right now for the title of best district ever, but I'm going to fight that. I'm going to fight that really hard. I know that we all love our districts very much. I will say that I am just listening to you in particular. I'm so excited to start working with you. What's going to happen? And I'm really excited about it, but we can talk about that later. So my favorite piece of advice is not necessarily specific to candidates, but I do want to get into that. It's just to talk less and listen more, which is something my dad always used to say to me. That took me a really, really, really long time to heed, because I've always been quite the talker. And, it did serve me well, especially as a candidate and initially, and still does with constituents now. But looking back to all the conversations that I've had, I think it made a real impact on people that I was willing to listen in the first place. I think people expect for politicians to have a lot of ideas and want to share them with everyone. But I was really always more interested in listening to make sure that, that idea of trusting your community, which is so important, that I was not only trusting them, but I was really listening to them and trying to keep my ear to the ground to truly understand what their needs are, not just what I think that their needs and wants are. And, even though our district is homogenous in a lot of ways, they are quite diverse. We have a lot of independents. We have a very strong growing independent population of registered voters, which indicates to me that, these two, this binary of Democrat and Republican that they keep hearing from is getting tiresome for them. And they want somebody who's willing to listen to the particular things that matter to them. So I think listening is really important for a candidate, for any candidate. I think what's important to relay to Black women in particular who are thinking about running sort of circles back to what Representative Pittman was saying about, and what Dr. Benjamin was saying about being yourself and being authentic, being whatever being a Black woman is to you, not what somebody else's idea of what that means is. Which for me in particular, I found very important. Just to be real about it, there are some times when I've really struggled with my own identity, with whether or not I was Black enough. And what I've discovered as a candidate is that whatever I am, that day, that moment is enough. Whether that has to do with my racial identity, my gender, my opinions on things, if they differ from the rest of my caucus, though those opinions are still important and they're still very valid. And I think it's important to recognize that every district and every candidate are very different. And so a lot of the things that may work in Representative Pittman's district absolutely would not fly in my district. Some of the tactics that we use to reach people, for instance, I live in a district that's half suburban and half semi-rural, with a lot of people who live out by Lake Thunderbird who live there for a reason. They don't want you knocking their door all the time. They moved to the lake so that they could get away from people, and they're very happy to be where they are and to not be bothered. We see that play out in city politics in Norman, and we also definitely see that play out in the way that they react to things or the way that they interact as a constituent with me and my office and the feedback that we get and whatever. And they have very particular needs. If you go to which I would recommend to anybody, because we have very strong ward pages on Facebook in Norman, very active ward pages, and the Ward 5 Facebook page for Norman, these are my people. Okay, these are my East Norman people. And it's very, very different. Like the concerns that they have and the things that go on in their day to day are very, very different than people who live in a planned and plotted community like the one that I live in, that I'm speaking to you from now in my room, my bedroom. So, there are certain ways that we go about communicating with people that are very different. And those are going to be different than 99 or 88 or District 1 in, Southern Oklahoma. Every district is different. So it's important that you bring your most authentic self to those people, because that authenticity is not only going to resonate with them and appear and really be more genuine to them than if I were to try to be some other version of myself that I think they want. And to reiterate what Representative Pittman said, I think it's also important that if you're thinking about running, that you continue to do whatever work it is that gives you purpose and makes you feel like you're contributing and using your gifts in the meantime. Because making those connections with people, politics is a contact sport, as Representative Pittman said, but it's also about relationships and making connections to people. And the more connections you can make now, the better off you'll be in the end when you're ready and willing to say to people, I'm ready to run. Then you'll have this whole coalition of people behind you who say, of course she's running. And that's really wonderful. What do we do? Where do we start? How do I plug into that? I'm definitely ready for that. I already saw you doing that, and I'm ready to help you and support you in whatever way I can.
Thank you so much for that, Representative Bell. Now we have Councilwoman Christine Allen joining us from Midwest City.
Well, hello. It's very, I'm honored to be here with everyone tonight. Had a little bit of difficulties, but that's generally happen when you have a lot to say. So thank you all for having me. I'm trying to keep this where you all can see me. I can see everyone else.
Great. The question we had for everyone, what is the best piece of advice you were given that has helped you in your roles? And what advice would you give to Black women wanting to run for office? And what can the public do to better support Black women in positions
Well,
of
I
influence?
think for one thing, what inspired me and has helped me is being around other strong political archons, just like E. Melvin Porter, and it really played a big part in my life for is what I wanted to do. I never expected to do political, but I did love to work with people and to be in the community. So one thing I would say is being around the environment of people that is in that particular range for as political, and so just being involved. I don't care how. And then what I would do is advise how someone. Well, that's how someone get involved, of course. Just being involved. Start at the grassroots. Grassroots consists of me as when you're working at the whatever party that you affiliate with. You start there and you build from there because you learn a lot. Um, I have to say that for being strong political people, we have to be voiceful, and to speak exactly of what is going on, what the situation consists of, and don't be afraid to speak up, because that is one of the issues that we have is not being direct. That's what I have experienced, and in my capacity, I speak up for what is right. I show them why, give them a reason why, and dissect it where they can understand it. And generally, I get things done.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Allen. You've been an inspiration, definitely, as one of the first Black women to serve on the Midwest City Council. So thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to open it up to audience questions, if anyone has any. In the chat or anything. I have to all ask it once. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any, so I would like to pivot back to Dr. Benjamin and doing her presentation. Are you here? Oh, what are the issues facing the Black community that you were most passionate about handling? Delaney Sills asked that question.
Would you and me? Hello?
Yes, Delaney Sills, audience question. What are the issues facing the Black community that you are most passionate about handling? And that's to everyone.
So I'm not an elected official, so to speak, but one of the big things that I got that guides what I get up and do every day is that I want to make sure that everyone has equal and fair opportunity, access to the ballot, and that they know what they're doing when they get there. They're educated when they get there. And the way information flows, I feel like it doesn't flow into our community as freely as it flows everywhere else. And I think it's because we are not a monolith and we're all over the place, as we should be. But I don't think that we get the information in the ways that most communities get them. And so, I get up every day trying to figure out how can I make sure that this corner of the world knows, what has changed with regards to elections, and where do they need to go, and what are the deadlines, and who's going to be on the ballot, and what is on the ballot. And so, that is kind of what drives me and what drives what I do. And that's not specific to our community. But what's specific to our community is the way that information flows. In Tulsa County, we're having an issue with the moving of a polling place. And I keep going into the community and finding more people who don't know that the polling place has been moved. And so those are the kinds of things that I fight for every day.
Yeah, I would add to what Chair Andrews is saying by, she reminds me that the historic disenfranchisement that's happened to and inside the Black community is so critical, especially because people who aren't within that community don't often have any idea that it's happening. And so, again, building that bridge to people and saying, no, this is real and it's really happening to people. And even if it's very subtle, it's always very intentional. And it's often hard for people to wrap their minds around the idea that people are being intentionally excluded and purposefully excluded from voting and from expressing their opinions at the ballot box. And so I'm really glad to have people like Alicia working on it. I'm very excited about the prospect that we have now in 2020. If there is a silver lining at all to be had, I think it's that people seem to be more engaged than ever. We're all at home. We've all watched everything we needed to watch on Netflix, and now we are looking for ways to engage with each other, and fixing these problems is, in my mind, one way for us to do that, to ensure that we're not all stuck at home watching all the things on Netflix again, because we've elected people who are prepared to make better policy decisions that get us back to work and back to normal life, whatever normal is going to look like in the future. So being able to address those things, it's difficult. We saw it even pre-COVID or right at the beginning of COVID, as we're trying to address the absentee voting problems in the legislature, that there's a lot of opposition to it from people who insist that the only thing that's happening that's bad in our voting system is fraud, just rampant fraud from I don't know where. But apparently one guy one time, which was very serious, was harvesting a lot of ballots for his own gain or for his candidate's gain, and kind of ruined it for everybody, and has created this perpetuated idea that fraud is so rampant that we have to almost disenfranchise other people to make sure it's not happening. And I just don't think that's true. And I think it's a wonderful place for us to focus our energy on. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about it.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. There was a great question brought up by Reverend James Dunbar. As Black men and brothers alongside you, what can we do to help? And his full question was, as Black men and brothers alongside you in service, what are some things you might suggest that would, one, make you feel supported, and two, change the narrative of making sure that Black women aren't the most disrespected people in the world? Representative Pittman, do you want to go first?
Anybody can tackle that question?
Yes.
I'm still having some technical difficulties. So the question that I read is, as Black men and brothers alongside of you, what can you do to help? speak up for us. Sometimes it is hard leading as a woman because men don't want to listen to you. They will overstep you, overtalk you, overspeak you, or dismiss your voice. Even in politics, but as well in our community. We know that we look to our pastors as leaders. We know that we look to our brothers, our fraternity leaders, and things like that, our teachers, our fathers. But sometimes it is as if that because we are women or because we are young women, men will dismiss our voice, or we are not protected by them against other men. We need men to speak up for us, donate to us, walk for us, campaign for us, just as much as we need women to do all of those things as well. Sometimes that can be difficult because it hasn't been the historical climate of our community. We are used to men leading. We are used to following them. And I think there's a fine line of still being under authority while leading, if you come from that Christian realm, and still respecting our male community leaders while bringing different ideas and different things to the table. Oftentimes, I found that even when I was on the House floor and my counterpart who quoted MLK spoke to me and quoted MLK against me, it was my white male colleagues that went to say something to him before it was my African-American male colleagues. And so regardless of personal appearances and personal preferences, I think it's helpful when you stand up for us, when you allow us to lead, when you donate and support us and things like that. And it's not automatically that a male is running for the seat. If the wife is better and more qualified and more equipped, give her the space and the grace to own all of the ground that she stands on.
All right. Candidate Turner, do you want to tackle that question?
When I think about things that folks could do to help support communities, the number one thing I continuously think of is show up, right? I think that people continuously, if they have it, will throw money. And I think one of the most valuable things to do is to donate your time, right? That is what really pushed, I think, all of our campaigns in the midst of COVID, right, is when people actually show up in whatever kind of volunteer aspect you have. And I know that people's time, and that's the thing, is like your time is very valuable to yourself, which is why people are so quick to donate money rather than donate time. But that is how we get people. That is how we get our people directly impacted into positions to make sure that we are changing things for the betterment of Oklahoma, right? For the betterment of the nation. And I think it's really, really important that when we're talking about showing up for people, that we use our platforms, right? But we also, if we create space for other people to utilize that platform, right? It's important for you to use your platform, but it's just as important for you to share the mic. I think it's really important, and I can't stress that enough, as a queer, non-binary person, to be able to share the mic, right? I think that platforms like this are really, really important and really stand to go further, right? In the work that we do when we share the mic with people who should be able to utilize those platforms as well, right?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Candidate Turner. We're going to go ahead and allow Dr. Benjamin to come back on to do her presentation. Hello. Without any technical difficulty.
Sorry again. And it's so funny because now I think maybe you all think I hopped off on purpose because it seems like the final comments I was going to make. I'm so appreciative that each of our panelists has sort of touched on it in a way that reminds me that, oh yeah, the research comes from somewhere, and that's from talking to people. And so that's good. What I wanted to sort of had planned to wrap up about was sort of this big this relationship between women of color, especially when they run, and their communities. And so, like I said, each panelist has really sort of talked about this. So it's so great. But I think that women run and win because they want to help their communities. They're natural problem solvers. And sometimes that can sort of work against them, right? So to candidate Turner's point earlier, the number of times that we have to ask women and women of color to run is so many. And I don't think it's always that they're not confident. It's that they might say to you, but I've been doing politics because I've been helping people every day. I've been connecting people every day. I've been problem solving in my community every day. I don't need to run to do those things. But to those young women, really any woman, I would say that's exactly why we need you to run, because you are going to enter this space, again, thinking about representation. Again, people sort of talked about this as we move through the panel, but you bring a unique perspective. And so we need that. We need your voice at various levels, whether that's city council, mayor, school board, county commission, state legislature, up to the presidency, right? We need that unique perspective. And so when you think to yourself, I don't have those skills, know that you already do, because you've served your churches, you've served on boards and commissions, you ran for office in your local sorority or your university sorority. You've done all the work that you need to do. You are so qualified. And I always tell my students when I teach, if you run for office, call me first. I will be your first donation, because I know that you're competent and I know that you can do those things. And you just need to get over the hurdle of the fear or the doubt in yourself, but know that you have those skills. And so I think the last thing that was on my official presentation was, it was really wonderful earlier. Maybe it was, time in 2020, but recently during the Emmys, when Regina King won her Emmy, what she said to people was, vote your ballot from the bottom up. And I thought that was so powerful, because people on the second page, on page 2, they need you. And maybe you've already made your decision from the top down. That's great. Spend some time at the lower half of your ballot, do your research there, and really, like Regina King said, vote from the bottom up. Right? Who's running for city office on your ballot, county, state legislature, right? We the people on this panel, we need you. We need your support, right? And so to really take the time to do that research, and if you have the time, as candidate Turner was just talking about, time and money, if you have a little bit of both, give those to those candidates that are not at the top, right? So that was really all I was gonna wrap up with before I got cut off. So I do appreciate that you all again granted me some grace and let me come back in with that. If we have other questions from the audience, I think we have a little bit of time to still take those, hopefully.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. We do have time for one more. What advice would you give to young leaders that want to run for office? And that is open to all of you. Representative Pittman, if you want to go first, since you're the youngest on the call. So.
Oh, that one's for me. I think it says in the chat, advice for young leaders. Lead in the spaces that you are in. If that is college, if that is church, if that is school, get involved in whatever you're passionate about. I tell young leaders that we vote on everything from birth to death. So find something that's interesting to you about the law and get involved. Come learn the process. You can shadow us. You can get involved. We take interns. But what's passionate to you? Is that your grandparents raising grandchildren? Is that education? And it doesn't even have to be hot button topics. It can be anything from transportation infrastructure to health and human services to anything, to technology, because we're going to have to figure out how to beef up our technology, even at the state level. All of those things, find a way for you to find your niche and get involved. And don't let anyone tell you that your idea is not good enough, that you're too young. Sometimes we learn things from the children who are pure of heart. Sometimes they are our best teachers because they have no motives, they have no pre-existing condition, and they're not jaded. So share your voice, share it proudly, and know that you only have to be 21 years old to run for office. That is no college degree. That is no requisite of you have to do this or you have to do that. You can run for office at the age of 21, take your leap of faith, take your step, and get out there, make your voice heard, because we need you at the table. The transition and changing the tide is coming. If you cannot see that 2020 is changing the trajectory of our nation, our world, and the future is here. It's not coming, and that's young people. So if you are a millennial, if you are Gen Z, or if you are Gen Alpha, make sure that you are letting your voices be heard, because we can learn so much from you, and we need you. If everyone that is leading is in a hub around, or if everyone that is leading is doing it as their second career and this is their retirement career, then who's going to be there to lead when they are no longer here? Who is there going to be there to lead when it's time to pick up the torch because it is fallen or because the light has dimmed? We need your energy. We need your legs. We need your lungs. We need your bodies. We need your mind, because it helps us grow as we see you grow.
So as the elder here, I'd like to add something for young leaders. So, I do a lot of candidate recruitment and candidate encouragement. And one of the big things that I say to young people as I am encouraging them to be involved in the process is be you. If you are 25, don't try to act like the 45-year-olds. Be you, because there is a reason that someone encouraged you to run. There's a reason that someone thought you were the right person to run. And they were looking for the authentic you. There will be people in your path who will expect you to behave like a 50-year-old. We got enough 50-year-olds. We need the youth. We need the youth voice. There are a lot of young folks who are disengaged from the process and feel disenfranchised. When I was speaking earlier, I was talking about representation matters. Representation matters also for young folks. They need to see people who look like them to believe that they have a voice, believe that they have an opportunity. And the more young people that we have, I consider Representative Bell to be young. The more young people we have, the more young people feel like there's a place for them, that they are being heard, that there is an opportunity for them, and that they're not shut out of the process. And so what I would say to young potential leaders and young leaders is to be you, to embrace who you are, but also be open and willing to listen to advice. But advice is just advice. Advice is guidance. Advice isn't a directive necessarily. Be open to the advice, but be you, because we need young voices at all levels.
Did anyone else want to answer that question? No.
If that's are we about to wrap up?
Yeah.
And I just kind of want to touch on a couple of things really kind of condensed here. So Delaney asked, what are some things that my campaign is running on, like legislation and things like that. And so I think for me, Angela, I get through November the 3rd, then some of the key things that I want to kind of work on is clearing up that voter suppression, right? I think one of the major things that COVID did was not bring about new problems, but really highlight things that folks are going through across the nation, but specifically that everyday Oklahomans have to go through, right? But we couldn't turn a blind eye to it. I'm really hoping to be able to work on legislation that is specifically kind of hinges around voting rights for folks who are leaving the carceral state. And if I really want to push it further, what I would like to be able to do is that we are working on voting rights for folks who are currently incarcerated, right? Making sure that folks who are clocked into county jails, right, have access to a ballot and are able to vote, because a good portion of the folks who are sitting in county jails are there because they could not afford bail, not there because they've been convicted of a crime, right? And so that's just kind of a little part of that. But I also want to work on some inclusive things, right? One of the things I'm really excited about going into the legislature, right, is the opportunity to not only be able to organize outside of my community, but also inside of the legislature. I'd like to be able to do some cleanup legislation to make things, to make language more inclusive, right, for gender nonconforming people, right, for our Two-Spirit communities. I want to make sure that the legislature looks like our community, right? And not just in that visible aspect, but also in the writing that we live by. Yet again, I think I put it in the comments earlier, but like being authentic to yourself, especially as a young person, is something that is so important, right? It's what allows me to quite literally show up in a sweater and overalls to do this campaign just about every day. And the hope is that maybe one day in the legislature, I could do that too, right? And that's not just because that's something I want to do, but because politics is something that is so hard to break into, especially if you're coming from a place of poverty, right? I did a HuffPost article where I talked about the federal economic floor, right? And our living wage, right, in Oklahoma, which is essentially the same thing, right? Just because it's the nation's floor doesn't mean it has to be ours. I came from a household where my mother worked 3 jobs to barely scrape by, right? I grew up, and then once I was off in university, right, I worked a job where I got paid probably once a month and made enough to make rent, right? I lived on SNAP, right? We need representation that has had to live like everyday Oklahomans, and being authentic and listening to your community. Like I said, I vowed I would never, ever run for office unless my community asked me to. And I think, and this is what worked for me, was that I dedicated my time to continuously asking folks, right, and specifically community organizers with shared lived experience of our communities to run for office. Because there is also nobility in working for a wonderful campaign for someone who is directly impacted, right? I think one thing that is really important to note is that there's a place for everybody in the movement. Some people aren't supposed to be the face of a movement. And I say that because I don't think I was meant to be the face of a movement, but I mean, here we are, right? And I think that there's something to be said about how we really look at ourselves and the work we do. I also started off community organizing, college campus community organizing. And I think that's something that maybe Representative Pittman mentioned earlier, right? I started out NAACP, Council on American Islamic Relations, the big event, right? Always doing community service. And there is a spot for everybody in the movement. I think it's really noble and takes a lot of hard time to sit down and really do that shadow work with yourself to see where you fit at best in the movement.
If I can piggyback on what candidate Turner said, just briefly, like, yes, amen. Can I have my amen fingers? Because a lot of times people look at our job and think that it is glamorous, or they look at our job and think that we make this money when we don't. We make $35,000 a year and we have to live off of that. And if you think of Black women, a lot of Black women come in with families and households to take care of, and grandparents that we have. Our families look different all the time. And so you may have someone that you have to care for regardless of your age or any of that. So understand, when we say we need people that look like us, that can understand and live this life, when you come in the legislature, you have to live the life of maybe not having to the income that you need, or having to work 2 jobs, but also having to raise money to maintain your position here. So these are our daily struggles as women, because some of us don't have the support system or the capital that our counterparts come in with.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies, so much for that discussion. And with that, that concludes tonight's panel. I want to thank our esteemed panelists, thank our sponsors, which are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, Heartland, True Sky, Credit Union, World, Bumbershoot, PR, Metro Family Magazine, the Gooding Group, Invest for their investment in Black women voices. And I want to thank our viewers for tonight's conversation and joining in. We hope that you left with keen insight on how to support Black women in positions of influence. And remember that you can support our work by giving at okwc.org/donate and write Black Women Voices in the additional comments section and completing our one question survey to let us know what you would like to see in a second season of Black Women Voices. The link is below. And I want to thank you guys again and good night. Have a good night.